Greetings, friends from St. Francis. Welcome to our book study, The Practice of the Presence of God. We're in week 2 of your syllabus. And so we're going into a section of the book called The Letters. And these were letters that he wrote to mainly religious that he knew in the community of Carmelites he was there with. Also some friends. I'll tell you how that works. But you notice in the book a lot of times it just says dear friends. Well, actually, most of those are Reverend Mother when you read the full book. So, and there were actually 16 recovered letters of his. There's 13 in the book here. They took some of the letters out for various reasons in the abridged version, but certainly this gives you enough content for our Lenten experience. So I thought it might be helpful before you delve into understanding of the letters is just understanding when this was all taking place and kind of more of a background context. So these letters were written really toward the end of his life. He lived till he was 77, the last year of when these letters were written. So he had formulated a lot of this and just was writing it down. So it wasn't like not like a life story or anything. It's purely things that they've recovered that had a lot of his core teachings, but right toward the end of his life. I think it might be helpful to give a little context and background because not knowing him in his early life, I think would leave us a little shallow on how he got here and how long it took him to develop some of this. While it's rather simple, it's also took years and years of detachment for him to get to this stage. So let me give you background. So Brother Lawrence was born in the Alsace-Lorraine region between France and Germany. Back then, there wasn't a France and there wasn't a full Germany. There were tribes basically that were running around in that mountainous region, and so there was a lot of war and these battles back and forth between groups. And when he became old enough, he, as most men did, he joined one of the army groups, and they were all like guerrilla fighters actually at that point. They were under very little rule, and they basically just said, okay, we're going to we're going to go take this town, and we're going to fight this town, and they did that. By the way, this is a period of time in France called the 30-Year War. It was a very bloody time, so a lot of killing, a lot of things that mankind shouldn't be doing, but unfortunately experienced. So during that time as a soldier, he did develop a very difficult interior damage. He was basically, today we would call it post-traumatic stress disorder. They didn't know what to call it back then, but they just knew he was broken when he came out and the war was over and he left. He actually got injured so bad that he was left the military. And later on, that would come to haunt him. Some of the things you'll learn later on when he was limping around from those the battles he was in. So he didn't have a place to live. He was too old to be back with his family. He was broken again inside. So he was traveling. He went up and tried to be a hermit. Went up into the mountains and found out, this is harder than it looks to live on my own off the land. So he came back down to the town, never fit in, went from town to town. Very lost soul. He had an uncle who happened to be a lay Carmelite and in Paris area. And so the family felt sorry for him and says, here, go visit your uncle. So this uncle took him under and said, here's a good lifestyle for you. Come and work with us here in this community. We have, a job for you, and, you consecrate your life as a lay brother. And he found that to be a good transition from him and his brokenness into this community. It's interesting, is like he was really thought he would be rejected. He had such a low self-esteem at that point. He was so broken. He basically, no one could love me. No one could, I'm just a waste. And the Carmelites immediately welcomed him, took him in, and said, no, we're going to give you a job. We're going to put you in, help in the kitchen. And they really got him back on track. And he, in a lot of his other writings about him, he was so loved and welcomed. And yet, for these first 10 years or so of when he was there, it took a slow period of learning to love himself and God first before he could get to some of these stages that we're going to read in the letters. he often would, at, unfortunately, at the advice of his spiritual director at the time, be focusing on the end times, death, afterlife, paying final judgment, things like that. And that was even worse for him because he's already broken and face all those things that he saw and experienced, the killings. It was very difficult for him. He really struggled for that period of time. So I just wanted you to be aware. There's a lot of pain and brokenness at underlying this. So the simplicity that he eventually reaches and culminates to is an awe-inspiring, but we just want to make sure that we understand this is a lifetime process. It's not something for us we could just pick up this book and change. I just want to explain that it took him time, like it's going to take us for God to work. And a lot of us, we have it so good today. It's going to be hard for us to even imagine what he went through. So. But anyway, let's get into the letters. So again, the first letter that we read is to a Reverend Mother, is one of his friends that was in. And she basically, he was basically telling her that what we do takes some effort, conscious effort. If you look on page 30, he says, once again, let us examine our inner selves and open up as much as possible to God's grace. We must continually walk in the Spirit and not to advance or fall back. And he goes to the Holy Spirit to even guide us while we're sleeping. So again, this is a point of time where he is now reaching unity with God and understanding that this divine indwelling comes with a responsibility also. Understanding that God is dwelling within us also means we have to do some introspection on an often basis. We as Catholics like to do examination of conscience, hopefully daily, even multiple times a day, as we talked about. So this is, kind of seeded through there of just having that understanding that he was always looking interiorly, and as we should. So the same nun in letter 2, basically, he wrote, and this is one key point that I'd like to really focus on today, is he uses the term in the middle of the page on 32 that it's necessary for the heart to be emptied of everything that would offend God, and God must be totally in control. So last week, I stressed a lot about the word surrender. And again, to give that a context, a lot of times the very first stage of us going through a transformation of God to unity with God is we have to stop doing what we're doing now. We have to surrender our will to God's will. I'm going in this direction. This is where I'm headed. And much like in a battle, when you put up your hands, you say to God, I just can't go that way anymore. I am surrendering myself to you, please. That's an important step to give that control over to God. That's where we were last week. This week now, we're crossing over actually into what I like to call abandonment. And in fact, he uses the word abandonment in one of the other letters coming up. But it's this emptying of ourselves, abandoning our old ways. So not just stopping, but abandoning. So now I am going to go in a different direction, and I'm going to actually put away the things that I used to do, and I'm going to head toward unity with God, to be in continual communion, as he says. And again, he stresses again to urge everybody to be aware of God's constant presence. So this is the stage he's at, and the stage especially really appropriate for us in Lent. When we talk about the things that we surrender and we abandon in Lent, it's good introspection for us to say, first of all, where I am with I surrender to God, and then what am I giving up? This abandonment, we love to give up things for Lent as Catholics. Again, a candy bar is one thing, but giving up the deeper things are even more imprinting in the soul. So he says on page 35, abandon any other concern, including any special devotions you've undertaken, simply as a means to an end. God is our end. So that's this continual walking away from our past lives and toward God, and that's a perfect context and direction of Lent, is walking away from our previous life and toward Easter. The fourth letter is actually same nun again. Even though this one says, "My dear sister in the Lord," it's actually the same person in all four letters we're reading right now. And he basically, at this point, makes especially in the middle of page 36, one of his classic teachings. During the meals or during the daily duty, lift your hearts up to God, because even in the least little remembrance will please him. You don't have to pray out loud. He's nearer than you can imagine. It isn't necessary that we stay in church in order to remain in God's presence. We can make our hearts personal chapels where we can enter any time to talk with God privately. I think that is so spiritually rich and uplifting, is that if we ask ourselves how we have our prayer experiences, for many of us, there's just a natural call when we're in church to God. God is present in the Eucharist. And it's an amazing thing is God's present in the Eucharist sacramentally, and God's present in us as baptized Catholics sacramentally. Those two work together, and that's why we get this draw to church. That's why we feel at home praying at church, is because we're sacramentally uniting God externally and internally. But he's also pointing that, and it's a real trick, take that out of church now and get that same feeling. Be at a football game and have that same spirit within you, and what you see and what you experience, thanking God for everything he's doing in your life right now. Especially in the daily tasks. That's what this book is known for, is in the smallest things we do, is being aware and making God presence. I think you can all recognize that that's life-changing, and the fact that I often talk about people that I know, myself personally, I used to swear when things would go wrong at work and things like that, and because I would petition God, say, okay, now I'm done praying, now I'm going to go to work, and now I'm going to be the work Brian, and I can swear at work, but I can't swear in church. No, that's not the way it works. You're the same divine indwelling all times. And so that's something maybe we can try to take a step in Lent and say, listen, I need to be the same person. I always like to say, make your life a living prayer. Everything you do and say is a prayer to God in the way you live your life. So I think he's stressing that heavily in this book, and it's a great context to move to that next step for us in Lent as we go through the book. So hope you're enjoying it, and I know it's great for me to reread it. I'll be putting in some more of the context. There's actually more to the life story of him that I'll try to weave in every week, so you understand some of the background of how he got to where he's at. A lot of us just think because the book is simple that his journey was simple. It wasn't, but he was on a journey, and we are too. So God bless. Have a good Lent.